So, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about the Nintendo Switch and its current library, some of the stuff that we maybe wonder about for the future library, and just what the overall potential legacy of the console and its complete library could be well after it's done. And in doing so, obviously, you kind of start to think about all of the games that Nintendo has released on the Switch so far, how each individual year has turned out as far as the release schedule within that year, and then you also start to wonder about maybe games that you would like to see on the Switch, franchises you would like to see from Nintendo make it to the console that we've yet to see show up. In fact, I've been thinking about this so much recently that I put a poll up on Twitter just a couple of days ago that got a massive response, and I asked you guys which Nintendo franchises would crush you the most if they did not make it to the Switch, if they skipped the Switch entirely. And as you can see from the poll here, it was a huge poll. I had 10,500 results into this poll, which is crazy. I mean, my average poll probably only gets like, I don't know, a couple of hundred. I've had maybe one or two that reach up to 800 or 1,000 responses. This sucker got over 10,000. So thank you to everyone who voted. And you can see, Twitter limits you to only 4 responses. So I picked 4 Nintendo franchises, higher profile franchises that we've yet to see come to the Switch: Star Fox, F-Zero, Pikmin, and Punch-Out. And of the 10,000 responses, you can see Pikmin ultimately came away as the winner with 38.2%. Now, I'm a fan, of course, of all 4 of these franchises that I included here. I am mostly a fan of the top 3. While I enjoy Punch-Out and will very much welcome a new one on the Switch, Star Fox, F-Zero, and Pikmin really stand out to me as franchises that I super care about and am very dedicated towards. And seeing Pikmin win here, which I didn't really expect, I have to admit, was great because I think Pikmin is fantastic. I mean, I've talked about with you guys several times that Pikmin 3 was the game that converted me from just like somebody who thought Pikmin was just fine and kind of fun to somebody who loves Pikmin and cannot wait to see Pikmin 4 show up on whatever Nintendo console that they release it on. I mean, it's been long enough. They talked about it years ago. The game is supposed to be done, so whatever happens with Pikmin 4, I just can't wait to play it. But if we focus back on the meat of that question that I asked you guys, it has to do with Nintendo franchises that we've yet to see on the Switch, and that might also skip the Switch entirely. And unfortunately, there's quite a few that we can actually think of. You have to go a little bit deep into Nintendo's catalog, of course, but there's quite a few franchises that we haven't seen. And, the Wii U was also known for having a couple of franchises skip it entirely as well. Obviously, one that very much sticks out to me. And when we see the Switch come out and be so successful, everyone loves it, everyone's buying it, every piece of software sells like crazy, everything Nintendo does is like magic on this machine, but we are also starting to see some gaps in their library. It's like, well, why would you not fill those gaps with these franchises that you've yet to release? Some of them haven't made it out on the past 2 generations. I mean, F-Zero wasn't on the Wii or the Wii U. And so here we are in the Switch where it's so successful. Why wouldn't you make a game like an F-Zero or a Pikmin and put it on the Switch? It seems so obvious. So I kind of wanted to explore some of these franchises and some of what we haven't yet seen on the Switch to see if these are things that eventually could make it over to this console or which ones are going to end up skipping it entirely. Now, like I said, you can go pretty deep into Nintendo's catalog here, and you can find really old classic things like Balloon Fight or Star Tropics and things like that, or heck, even Earthbound. And sure, these are franchises we would like to see Nintendo bring back in some sort of modern way. And I'm not talking about just like a remaster or even a port. And we're not talking about, versions of these games that might be available on the NES or SNES libraries and the online service. I mean new actual iterations and entries. Not ports, not even just remasters per se, but actual sequels and successors and games within these franchises. And so, bringing over like Earthbound or even Mother 3 that people want isn't quite the same as making a new Earthbound. Same with something like, Balloon Fight. How obscure could that possibly be? Or Excitebike, things like that. But if we look a little bit more recently, in some of the franchises that I think actually could make sense and even honestly have a chance at being brought to a modern Nintendo console, either this generation or next generation, there are some pretty interesting ones. We start with the first 4 here. I mean, Star Fox, what do we say? I love Star Fox. I even thought Star Fox Zero was pretty good. It's not amazing, and there are problems, yes, but I liked it. I own it. I've played it several times. I think it was good for what Nintendo and Miyamoto were trying to do. But as far as the Switch is concerned, I think it is a perfect console to bring Star Fox to. And in my poll even, it was the second highest voted answer with, 28, almost 29% of the vote. And I think Star Fox makes a ton of sense on the Nintendo Switch. Yes, we got Starlink, and Starlink is fine, even though it's a Ubisoft property that's not really about Star Fox. It just had them included. I'm talking about an actual Star Fox game where Fox and the team are the star, Nintendo's gameplay is the star, and hell, I'll even take a Star Fox Adventures. You guys know, I really enjoy Star Fox Adventures, so I think that franchise makes a ton of sense. F-Zero, like I already said, skipped the last two Nintendo home console generations. I mean, the last home console release, F-Zero GX, was on the GameCube, I think in 2003? So does that make it 17 years old at this point? No Wii game, no Wii U game. The Switch is awesome. Put F-Zero on the stupid Switch. Like, it just makes so much sense. And I mean, our imaginations run wild with how great that game would look, how fast it could be. We've played the fast racing games, and we see those as like kind of a precursor to a modern F-Zero. You imagine, heightened combat that you could have with your other racers, obviously online play, maybe different modes beyond just racing or a battle mode. It's crazy. And the customization of your vehicles and of your characters, I mean, they could just go crazy. And it's another franchise, just like pretty much every franchise, right? That makes sense on the Switch. When the Switch is as successful as it is and makes software move as much as it does, every franchise literally makes sense on it. That's just the way of it. The same with any console. I mean, I feel that way even about the PlayStation 4. So, yes, F-Zero is a franchise people have been waiting for. They teased it on, like, the Wii U, but Miyamoto was like, oh, we didn't have the right controller for it, or whatever he said, which just made no sense to any of us. And so, yeah, bring F-Zero over to the Switch. Now, I've already talked a little bit about Pikmin, and I've even said before that I believe Pikmin will be making it to the Switch, so I'm actually less concerned about that one. In fact, it might even be why it won the poll, because I think a lot of people feel like Pikmin has a really good chance at coming to the console. But then we go to Punch-Out!, and part of the reason I included it is because, honestly, ARMS is a game that exists on the Switch, and it's a good game. I don't love it, but it is very good. Nintendo clearly put a lot of care into it, and it was something that takes use of the motion control of the Joy-Cons to emulate boxing. And that's what Punch-Out! Is. And, Punch-Out! On the Wii was so very successful and so very popular. I barely played it, actually, but I know it's a very good game, and I think Punch-Out! Makes a lot of sense on the Switch. I think it's also the kind of franchise I could see Nintendo wanting to bring back after so long. Now, beyond these four main ones I featured in the poll are a couple of other franchises that could make sense, and a lot of us would like to see show up on the Switch, and a huge one people have asked for a long time, and I agree with this, is Kid Icarus. Kid Icarus Uprising on the 3DS surprisingly made a huge splash, partly because I think they put a lot of time into that game. The production value is through the roof. And we all know the issues. The controls were awkward. It would make your hand cramp. They had to release a little peripheral along with it to try to hold the 3DS for you to make it better. I mean, that part of it was kind of a mess, but overall, the game was awesome. Ton of combat, great graphics, voice acting throughout, lots of customization, multiplayer stuff. It was a great game, and it really brought Pitt to the forefront of a game. It actually made him a star and made him somebody who we could connect to as a character with an actual personality. And I think that that's a franchise and a character and a world that could do really well on a modern home console from Nintendo. And so, yes, we would like to see Kid Icarus show up on the Switch. Another game people have asked for so long is Golden Sun. And honestly, you guys know I'm not a big RPG or JRPG guy. However, I did play the first Golden Sun, in its day. I had a Game Boy Advance, and I bought that game for my Game Boy Advance, and I was shocked how much I fell in love with that game, and I played it all the way through. I don't remember a whole lot of it. I just remember that I loved it, and I played it, on my Game Boy Advance pre-Game Boy SP. I had to use the lighting of either a little device attached to it or the room lighting. I did not have a backlit Game Boy Advance when I played that game, and I played it all. It was that good to me. And there's been rumors and rumblings here and there that have come and gone about a new Golden Sun being made over the years, for the 3DS or for the Wii U, and now we're in the Switch age, and clearly this makes sense. People want this game. Tons of RPG content on the Switch. RPG fans love this console, and for good reason, because there is so many games, and I think Golden Sun would be great. And again, I'm not an RPG fan, but that's an RPG I would get behind without a shadow of a doubt, immediately I would jump on a brand new Golden Sun. So hopefully we see that happen. I think another long forgotten franchise by Nintendo is Pilotwings, which is a game that first showed up on the Super Nintendo, and I never really had much of a chance to get into, but I'll tell you, I fell in love with it on the Nintendo 64. Because that was one of like 2 or 3 games that existed at that time. And the 64 was so new that it was exciting just to have anything outside of Mario 64. And so, yeah, when we got our Nintendo 64, we had just those 2 games, Mario and Pilotwings. And I loved it at the time because it was just such cool technology and the graphics were just awesome. It was a lot of fun. And I think that could be brought back in a modern way. There was a Pilotwings game made on the 3DS that I never played, but I heard it was okay. I would like to see Pilotwings come back for sure. I don't think it would be the hugest hit. I mean, they would have to really make some sort of significant online component to it, I think, that really brings people in, some customization and some online stuff. Kind of the way Animal Crossing does it for that franchise. If they could do the same concept for Animal Crossing and apply it to a new Pilotwings on the Switch, I think that could be really cool. It's a unique, weird, like, skydiving simulator kind of game that just gives you all sorts of different stuff to do, but it's also kind of peaceful, and I just think it'd be really neat, so maybe we see Pilotwings come back. Now, I do also want to bring up Donkey Kong, and I know that might sound a little bit weird to you guys, because yes, we've already had Tropical Freeze ported from the Wii U over to the Switch, but I'm not truly going to count that, right? I don't think that that's a fair thing to say because a port of an existing game, like I said at the beginning, isn't quite what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a new game. I would like to see a Nintendo Switch designed and developed Donkey Kong game, even if it's a third Donkey Kong Country game. I mean, I know that a lot of us probably want something different than that. We've had 2 great ones. Let's move on to something else. But even if they did make a third one, I think we all know it would be really great and we would be excited to play it. So I would even welcome that. But some kind of new Donkey Kong experience, something 2D, something emulating the classic games, or even something like Donkey Kong 64, something in a 3D world. I mean, there's something there. Donkey Kong is one of their oldest characters and IPs, and it's a very popular franchise. I don't want like a Donkey Konga thing, you know, nothing like a Jungle Beat or a Donkey Konga. I'm talking about a real game with objectives and goals and gameplay and platforming and, you know, fighting, whatever. Give us a really kick-ass Donkey Kong game on the Switch. I think there's a pretty decent chance it might happen, so I've really got my hopes up for that. Now, I briefly mentioned this a little bit earlier when I was talking about the older games like Earthbound and Star Tropics, but I do think that Excitebike could also have a future on a Nintendo console and could make a lot of sense on the Nintendo Switch as well, because it's just a great motorcycle racing game. You know, you're on a dirt bike, you're doing jumps, you're doing tricks, you're racing, you're doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Just like with F-Zero, if you imagine that game brought into a modern age with a modern formula, online play, customization, tons of different modes, obviously updated graphics and sound, all of that stuff becomes really exciting. And I also really liked Excite Truck on the Wii. I thought that was kind of a cool little spin-off thing for that console. I would, however, like to see something a little bit more traditional. I think Excitebike 64 was really damned good, by the way. So if they were to maybe take that as their template and just make it way, way, way newer and doper and more fun for a modern Nintendo Switch, I think it could be great. So I would like to see Excitebike come back. And of course, this conversation would not be complete without Metroid. That's right, Metroid. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, Rob, they already announced a Metroid game for the Nintendo Switch. It's Metroid Prime 4. And you're right, they did. And at the end of the day, I firmly do believe there's, I don't know, more than a 70 or 80% chance that that game will come to the Switch. Honestly, it's probably even higher than that, if I'm being honest. It's probably about a 90% chance that, yes, Metroid Prime 4 will release on the Nintendo Switch. But for the sake of this conversation, it's absolutely worth considering that some sort of crazy and insane things happen behind the scenes that ultimately prevent that game from releasing on the Switch, and on top of that, prevent any other new Metroid game from releasing on the Nintendo Switch. Again, I don't expect that, but here we are, over 3 years into the life of this console, with its biggest Metroid game announced and then scrapped and restarted and delayed. At this point, anything is possible. And for all we know, in 3-ish years, we might be moving on from the Nintendo Switch onto the next console, as I've said several times. And you've heard me state, I think that Metroid Prime 4 could end up being a launch title for that next console. Now, if it's cross-generational, then that means we get Metroid Prime 4 on the Switch. But if it takes that long to develop this game, and they can't release that on the Switch, then suddenly we don't have Metroid Prime 4 on the Nintendo Switch. And then what happens? Now, does the long-rumored Metroid Prime trilogy release on the Nintendo Switch? Maybe, and if so, then that means we get that Metroid game. But there might not be anything to that, you guys. I don't care how much the scuttlebutt behind the scenes has made it sound like that game is real. As far as I'm concerned, it's not real until we see it. Even if I tend to believe it's going to happen, it's not been seen, it's not been confirmed, so I refuse to believe in it until Nintendo shows us that it's real. So that's a wild card, and as I've said many times, I do expect some kind of 2D Metroid game to be released on the Switch. A sequel to Metroid Fusion, a Metroid 5, a brand new 2D spin-off. Even a Samus Returns port would be, not exactly a new game like I said, but it could be something pretty cool. And yes, I do believe that one of those things could happen, but again, we haven't seen it. And so, while there's way more reason to believe some kind of Metroid game, if not several Metroid games, could release on the Nintendo Switch, right now, in mid-2020, 3.5 years into this console's life, we haven't seen or had a single Metroid game released on this console. And again, Metroid and Super Metroid on the online services do not count, okay? I'm not talking about that. We're talking about a new game, something significant and modern, okay? So a Prime Trilogy, okay, Prime Trilogy would not be new, to be fair, okay? I have to admit that that wouldn't be new, but we're still going to count the Prime Trilogy, okay? So Prime Trilogy, a 2D Metroid game, a Metroid 5, or Metroid Prime 4, one or some of those games need to release on this console, and there is the slight possibility, you guys, that it doesn't happen, and we end up moving on from the Switch before any one of those games has a chance to release. It would crush me. I know that it would crush you guys as well, so we just have to hope that that doesn't happen, but honestly, it was worth bringing up on this video. So those are some of the franchises and games that I think about Nintendo making on the Nintendo Switch, and how devastating it would be for some or all of these to not ever release on the Switch. To think that Nintendo could have a super successful Nintendo console and throughout the entirety of its run never get a Star Fox or a Pikmin or a Punch-Out or a Golden Sun or a Donkey Kong or a Metroid game released on this console, and F-Zero. I mean, several of these. More than like 2 of these need to make it to this machine before it's all said and done. It would just be crazy to me to think that some of these franchises might not release on one of Nintendo's most successful consoles. In fact, it's getting close to being Nintendo's second most successful home console of all time. So how could you not have a Pikmin or an F-Zero or a Metroid on this machine? Or a Donkey Kong? It would just be mind-blowing to think that it could happen. But right now, we don't have any indications of games in any of these franchises, except for Metroid. We don't know if they're making a Star Fox or an F-Zero or a Donkey Kong. We don't know about a new Punch-Out. But I think that they should happen. So this is just my random conversation about this idea because I've been thinking about it for a while. You guys clearly had a lot to say by the insane response to my Twitter poll. So I want to hear what you think. What do you think about the games that I brought up and the franchises that I talked about? Which ones do you want to see the most? Which ones do you think are the most likely? And which ones do you think might not make it to the Switch? Talk about it below. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob, Overlook to Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.